Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another online event by PISM, online discussion Zapad 2021, a threat to NATO's eastern flank. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Marcin Terlikowski. I'm head of Polish Institute of International Affairs International Security Program, and I'll be running this show for you today, but I will definitely not be the main star here because we have top experts together with you to share their outlook, their views on this very interesting situation which we have to the east of NATO's borders. And indeed, as a matter of fact, we do have an interesting situation according to the publicly announced scenario of the Zapad 2021 drills, which I guess otherwise should not have to be introduced. Are well known to all of you who connected to watch us today. We have just started, Poland with other states, of course, under different names, have just started an aggression, an armed aggression against Belarus and Russia. So the drills, the live part of the drills have just started with this scenario. But here to talk with you, to present you the scenario, the exercises, the significance, and the outcome on NATO, on Belarus. We have top experts with us today who agreed to spare their time and talk with you on these issues. And starting with Anna Maria Dyner, who is our PISM research analyst following closely defense policy of Russia, but also policy of Belarus and overall defense and security issues on the post-Soviet space, so in Russia and in some other former CIS countries. Next, we will have Arsen Sivitsky, who is co-founder and director of Minsk-based Center for Strategic and Foreign Policy Studies. And at the same time, he's a Belarusian security and foreign affairs expert. Definitely, last but definitely not least, we have Mathieu, who is with Chatham House. He's research fellow with the Russia and Eurasia program, so following closely Russian defense policy, Russian foreign policy. As I said at the beginning, my role here will be definitely limited. I'll be trying to roughly keep time and read out questions. And when it comes to questions, you are very much welcomed to ask them. You can do it either through YouTube chat on function or on Twitter. We will be collecting them and I will be reading them aloud. So if you could please also indicate who is expected to answer your question, that would be very helpful. So without further ado, we will start with Anna, who will briefly present the Zapad 2021 drills. Anna, we know it's a regular event, it's a regular Russian-Belarusian exercises. It has always gathered attracted attention of NATO, of Poland, of other countries in the region. But this time I feel the attention is extremely high. The interest is there from the parts from stakeholders who have never been that interested. So tell us what is different with this year's, with this edition of Zapad, comparing to what we experienced in previous reiterations in 4 years ago and 8 years ago and even earlier than that. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marcin, very much. Okay, so I'll try to be brief, not to extend this 10 minutes of our time. Starting with your question about Zapad exercises, of course, as you, Marcin, said, they're regular exercises which are organized every 4 years, and they are the biggest this year test of combat readiness of Russian armed forces and Belarusian armed forces. And at the same time, Zapad exercises are the last phase of 2 years the training cycle of Belarusian and Russian armed forces. Why just 2 years, not 4 years? It's just because in next 2 years, we will have different type of exercises by Russia and Belarus, which are called Union Shield, but they will be then also the last phases of 2 years period of together training of both armies. So of course, Zapad exercises are also the one which are testing combat readiness of a regional group of forces, which includes Belarusian armed forces and armed forces from Western Military District of Russia. Here comes some differences from previous Zapad exercises. Maybe I will add one more important issue, that those kind of exercises, because every year Russia provides such kind of exercises in different military districts. More or less, they started the first, how to say, new type of Zapad exercise start in 2009, which was combined with then launching the huge reform of Russian armed forces. This year, Russian MOD announced that in this year's Zapad exercises are involved more than 200,000 of troops, which is much more. It was said and announced in previous years. About more or less of 80 aircrafts, I mean planes and helicopters, 760 other units of military equipment, and even 15 ships. So here it comes that what is the main difference, that they are the biggest exercises on Western military dimension after the collapse of Soviet Union. Because of course in Russia they were organized bigger drills like East in previous years, which in which was involved 300,000 of troops, but nevertheless probably they are the biggest one from the Soviet Union collapse of Soviet Union times. And when we look at the number, because in Belarus officially in this active phases which started today will be involved 20,800 troops, which of course is combined with the regulation of Vienna document and obligatory observation. However, when we look on the numbers of Belarusian troops officially engaged and Russian troops officially engaged, it also gives us a picture that more or less about 20–25% of regular military staff of both armies are to somehow be engaged in this military exercises. And just coming back to some numbers, this 12,800 troops, this number includes 2,500 from Russia and 50 from Kazakhstan, but it's also worth to mention that they are just representing CSTO rapid reaction forces. And in Belarus, there will be used 140 tanks, about 110 artillery units, and 30 planes and helicopters. And we also have to pay attention that those exercises are divided into two phases. First, which will take place in, which starts today and will take place in Belarus, is on more or less the same level like it was organized 4 years before, and of course it shows that in this part is rather this included this defensive component. And as you mentioned today, Nyaris, Polar Republic, and Pomoria just started a military aggression against Polish Republic and Central Federation. When we look at the maps of the artificial countries, it is very easy to see that Polar Republic and Pomoria, it's Poland, and Nyaris is partially Lithuania, and to some extent also some part of Latvia. And Polish Republic is of course Belarus, and Central Federation is just Russian Federation. So here we have some similarities with 2017 scenarios, but the borders of those countries, artificial countries, are different. When we look, for instance, how Westphalia, Vesnoria, and Lubania looked like 4 years ago. And of course, we are looking at these active phases, which starts today and will last until 16th of September. Sorry. But when we look directly when those exercises started, I will even risk the thesis that they started in winter, because then it was like HQ preparation, but also when we look at the beginning of this year's polygon season, I will put it like that, when we see that in February, both armies, I mean, especially Russian in Kaliningrad Oblast and Belarusian, started to train. And when we look to the scenarios of those trainings, we can see that they were combined with each other. And after that, there were plenty of smaller drills. Of course, the preparation phases started more or less on the end of June, middle of July. In the end of July, there were just, Russia shifted some troops to Belarusian soil, but nevertheless, also in Russian MOD website, we can observe that there were plenty of smaller exercises, which were directly said that they are directly combined with those drills. Logistic one, but also electronic warfare units trained, and both in Belarus and in Russia. And what is different to some extent, that officially today also some kind of exercises started in so-called People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk, under which I mean those territory of Ukraine, which is under Russian control in de facto, not Kyiv's one. And when we look at also information to Russian MOD, also very active are some Russian units which are stationing in Transnistria, which is also very important to put to this picture. What is also different? Also the scale of hybrid activities, which was mentioned before, associated with these drills. First of all, is information warfare, but also something which tackled the most Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. I would rather say that first of all it was Lithuania, then Poland and Latvia. It's migrant crisis, which was caused by Belarusian authorities. Then, of course, what is different, especially in comparison to 2017, is political internal situation in Belarus. Totally different. Nowadays, we are just having tensions with Western countries. 4 years ago, we can observe that the Belarusian side was trying to be as much open as they could. During the preparation time, even was huge and commented briefing in NATO HQ in Brussels. Nowadays, we also are observing the deepening of integration of both countries, I mean Russia and Belarus. I'm not also talking about yesterday's meeting of Lukashenko and Putin, in which they agreed that integrational programs will be signed this year, but also the deepening of military integration of both countries. This year in February, both countries signed 5-year program for cooperation for 5-year period. The first one, which was publicly announced. And of course, both countries started to build common training centers. Probably in the Grodno Oblast, we will have common training centers for air defense and air troops, both from Russia and Belarus. Of course, as it was in previous years, these Zapad exercises are to show Russian power, Russian new equipment, and Russia that succeeded in rearming of its own troops. I will risk thesis that hybrid warfare, hybrid activities won't stop on 16th of September. They will be last much longer than these active phases of the drills. Of course, I think that to some extent, this scenario, when we are looked at before the military aggression, those three Western countries wanted from this Polish Republic to change its own political system and the authorities of them to resign, is very visible that this scenario is a reflection of concerns of Belarusian authorities and political situation in Belarus. So here are the main differences. I will stop here, and I'm also looking forward questions from our audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for this kickoff. I will not attempt to sum up what you said, but two things struck me, and I think they require to be noted for our further discussion. The changed international context or regional context of the exercise, which involves the situation in Belarus, but not only with regards to internal political situation, but also with the perspective of military and political integration of Belarus and Russia, which were not which were not there 8 years ago, which is obvious. And also the context of signaling improved Russian readiness and capacity to use force if Russia deems its vital interests are threatened by NATO. So the scale of forces, the number of equipment used, the new types of equipment that you mentioned, they also, in my opinion, how I read what you just presented, they also testify to this thesis, to this argument that Russia is signaling that it is perhaps ready more than ever to respond with force to any development which it may deem as kind of harming its core interest. But let's come back to the Belarusian context. We have, as I said at the beginning, we have Arsen Sivitsky with us. Arsen, of course, the situation on the border with the migrant crisis is perhaps what attracts the bulk of public opinion's attention. But we have the process which is less visible, but perhaps even more important for regional security for Belarus, the process of political and military integration of Belarus. We've just learned that there will be no new roadmap signed this week or soon, but it is there around the corner, and we have a process in which Belarusian defense policy, security policy may start to look even more different than we assumed to. So please tell us how Zapad plays into this, and maybe also develop some thoughts which Anya presented about the maybe red lines of this military integration, about the perspective, about what future basically may bring for Belarusian-Russian military integration. Arsen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin, for the introduction. Dear colleagues, good afternoon once again. And I would like to start with a few observations in order to develop some points that Anna has mentioned during her presentation. So when we are speaking about Zapad, we actually need to distinct two types of exercises, especially from the point of view of its planning and command and control. The first type is a Belarusian-Russian joint strategic exercise Zapad that is very limited in numbers, in figures, in its scale, and traditionally it takes place on the territory of Belarus. And the second type is so-called strategic command and staff manoeuvres conducted by the Russian armed forces in the Western strategic direction. And although in the mass media these two exercises are presented in the context of one grand design, they actually two separate ones. The reason is that when it comes to the joint strategic exercise between Belarus and Russia on the territory of Belarus, both parties, I mean the general staffs of Belarus and Russian armed forces, are involved in the preparation, planning, and command and control. But when it comes to the Russian strategic command and staff maneuvers, only Russia plans it, conducts it, and the Belarusian side is not engaged in any preparation and planning. So this is my first important observation, and in my presentation I will be focusing mostly on the joint Belarus and Russian exercise, but not on the strategic maneuvers. The second important observation that the environment in which this joint exercise is being conducted is more important than the exercise itself. And this environment today is determined by the political crisis in Belarus, confrontation between Belarus and the Western countries, as well as the escalating migration crisis on the border between Belarus and the EU and NATO member states. I have also one more important observation. Comparing to the previous Zapad that took place in 2017, I don't expect any strategic surprises from the Russian side, because as we remember, at least judging by the analysis of railway wagons logistic data, Russia was planning to bring at least 3-5 times more troops than it had been planned together with the Belarusian side. But today I don't see any intentions from the Russian side to present some strategic surprises during the Zapad on the territory of Belarus. Actually, Minsk and Moscow have switched their roles, and now Belarus is playing the escalation dominance strategy, and the Belarusian leadership is trying to use the Zapad exercise in order to demonstrate its importance for the West, especially at the background of new regional balance of power. But also Minsk tries to engage Russia with the help of this Zapad exercise in the confrontation with the West, and is trying to enjoy some political, diplomatic, and military support. But what I'm seeing now that Moscow is reluctant to support its Belarusian ally, and one of the evidence is that Russian President Vladimir Putin is not going to meet with Alexander Lukashenko during the final phase of Zapad exercise, as it was envisaged during the preparations. So let me start with some comments on the scenario of the exercise that Anna has already covered. I agree that it actually reflects the main propaganda narratives of the Belarusian authorities regarding the political crisis that started last year, as well as subsequent confrontation with the Western states. But what is more important from the military strategic point of view, that it reflects the institutional architecture of joint military components of Belarus and Russia within the Union state framework. So according to this institutional framework, when aggression happens against Belarus, immediately the regional group of forces action plan is activated. The regional group of forces is composed of land component that includes all the Belarusian armed forces plus special operation forces, and the First Guards Tank Army of the Western Military District of the Russian Federation. And the second component is the aviation one. It includes all Belarusian air and air defense forces, plus the six air and air defense forces army located in the Western Military District. So when the aggression starts, the Russian part of the regional group of forces is being deployed on the territory of Belarus, so they begin to protect Belarus from the external aggression. What is worth mentioning that the permanent commander of the regional group of forces is the chief of the general staff of armed forces of Belarus, who is reporting directly to the higher state council of the Union state, represented by two presidents, Alexander Lukashenko and Vladimir Putin, and they are taking all political and military decisions on the basis of consensus. So if you look at the exercise scenario, it also reflects this traditional institutional framework and deployment action plans. So from this perspective, this scenario doesn't differ from the previous Zapads. But what is important to follow, from my point of view, during this exercise, actually, two things. Whether the first one, whether the escalation crisis will happen during this exercise, and it could lead to some intentional or unintentional military incidents on the border with NATO member states. But judging by the previous comments of Belarusian leadership, and first of all, at least they were trying to use the migration crisis in order to threat the Western side and to urge Western countries to sit down to the negotiation table, starting the direct communication with the Belarusian leadership. If we look at the recent statements, they are quite the escalatory. And also because Belarus has invited several international observers from OSCE, from UN, from the International Red Cross Organization, plus some observers from neighboring countries, I don't expect any incidents during the exercise. At least the Belarusian side will try to avoid them. And the second important issue that we need to follow is what pieces of Russian military equipment will stay after Zapad in Belarus. And according to my assessments, we can expect that at least one wing of Su-30SM fighter jets will stay in Belarus in Baranovichi, as well as some subunits of Russian air defense forces related to the command and control of the S-400 system. They have been deployed already on the Belarusian side under the guise of the exercise, and Russia has contributed these military facilities in the interests of the joint combat training center in Grodno, which will be specialized on air forces and air defense forces training. So maybe Russia will also provide Belarus with some additional ammunition, and it could be part of a deal regarding the prolongation of lease agreement on 2 Russian military technical facilities in Belarus. I mean, Gantsevichy radar station plus communication node of Russian Navy in Boulègue. Because Belarus is planning to prolong this agreement for free, it could be a package deal that Russia has to supply the Belarusian armed forces with some pieces of Russian modern military equipment, including some fighter jets, helicopters, maybe pieces of its air defense systems, or S-400 or Panzer, something like that. At least this has been discussed recently, but when it comes to the agreements concluded yesterday in Moscow, we need to underline that the roadmap on a deeper political military integration has been excluded from the negotiation agenda. Lukashenko spoke yesterday about the joint defense space, but actually it exists since mid-1990s, and we don't expect any significant transformation of the current institutional architecture, in which actually the Belarusian side is playing the leading role when it comes to the command and control of the regional group of forces, as well as Minsk has been blocking the Kremlin's intentions to transform this architecture and, for instance, either to subordinate the regional group of forces to the Joint Strategic Command West, meaning resubordinate the Belarusian armed forces to the Western Military District, or Belarus still is refusing to allow Russia to deploy permanent military base in Belarus. So when it comes to this joint combat training center, we need also to take into consideration that it will be subordinated to the unified regional air defense system, and in peacetime all Russian assets assigned to this structure, to this facility on the territory of Belarus, is subordinated to the central command post of the Belarusian Air Forces and Air Defense. So meaning that these units will be not extraterritorial, they will be subordinated to the Belarusian command. And comparing to the Kremlin's intention to deploy permanent Russian air base in the Belarusian soil, I would say this joint combat training is rather a tactical concession to Moscow, because in case of the Russian military base, it would have an extraterritorial status and will be directly subordinated to the Russian military leadership in Moscow. So still Lukashenko has been managed to prevent this scenario, suggesting Moscow another options. And one more important conclusion, actually, this is the first year when the Russian strategic command and staff maneuvers actually overshadow the joint Belarusian Russian exercise in Belarus. Before at least 2017, before the previous Zapad, all attention of the Belarusian and Russian leadership was focused on conducting the joint exercise in Belarus, and according to the defense plans and military posture of the Russian armed forces in the Western strategic direction, actually Belarus was playing a role of security guarantor of the Russian Federation in the Western strategic direction. But since 2014, Russia has been decreasing its dependence on Belarus in protecting the Western strategic direction, also deploying additional military formations in the Western military district on the border with Ukraine and Belarus. And now we see that the Russian MOD claims that actually Russia is going to protect Belarus from external aggression. So it means also that Belarus is losing its exclusive status of a security partner for the Russian Federation. And if you look at the second stage of the exercise that will take part in Russia, Belarus is only one of the participants, in addition to military forces from Sri Lanka, India, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan. So Russia has never presented Zapad exercise in such a manner and have never engaged so many friendly countries, meaning that Belarus is losing its exclusive status of security partner for the Russian Federation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arsen. Well, again, this was an extremely rich presentation. I will not attempt to summarize it, but I really gather from it that the situation as regards the bilateral relations between Russia and Belarus are not black and white, and the reality is much more complicated. There is a bargaining. There are attempts, as you mentioned, to slow down the process, to make the most of it. And it's not that Russia is controlling everything and everywhere, and this is what we really should bear in mind. I guess we will be coming back to this in the Q&A phase. You mentioned also the potential threat of a border crisis, kind of an escalation during the exercise. I guess we'll hope it will not happen, but I think that is also something what we will be discussing. But for that we need time, and we need to hear still Mathieu, who has been patiently waiting for his turn. Mathieu, well, everybody's looking at Zapad. Everybody who follows the defense, everybody, I guess, in NATO military structures are definitely looking at Zapad. So could you please, in your kickoff, maybe try to address the issue of whether the NATO posture regarding its forward presence in the eastern flank, but also the changes in NATO force structure, NATO command structure, which have been introduced since 2014. are they validated by what we are seeing with Zapad, or is it a call, the Russian-Belarusian exercise, or is it a call to actually start a discussion anew whether it is enough what NATO is presenting as regards its posture towards Russia? Mathieu, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Marcin, and it's great to be here with such a great panel. So listen, I'll tackle this idea of the messaging behind Zapad, but the first caveat I'd like to make is that this is less about the geopolitics. So this is less about the great power propaganda that Russia is sending, and more about the military value that that the Russian armed forces will get from this training and this drill. It's a strategic exercise. They need it in terms of military value, in terms of lessons learned, in terms of further incorporation, in terms of command and control. So this is very much about the Russian army looking in and on itself, more than just sending geopolitical messages. I don't want to downplay them, but I don't want to overhype them, right? So it's not because Russia is rehearsing somewhere that we should completely change our approach to deterrence and defense and dialogue with Russia. That said, it's also a unique geopolitical context, and it's a unique period of time. I won't discuss Belarus because I think they've been sufficiently covered in great detail by my colleagues Anna and Arsen, but just to mention the US and NATO part of it, because this has NATO's attention, this has Polish attention, of course, and this has Baltic countries' attention as well as the Nordics. So, you know, the spoiler alert of the day is that however defensive Russia wants to present officially their exercise, they always call for a defensive exercise in nature. This is not about offense, you name it. But Zapad has always been about warfighting, regional war. It's about rehearsing for war because Russia plans for wars, not just battles. And they're planning it at the regional level, which is an operational strategic warfighting simulation with the possibility to go large scale, including with nuclear deterrence at the strategic level. Because Zapad traditionally always ends with a nuclear readiness check and strategic bomber overflights to potentially raise the cost of deterrence and potentially raise the ante at the strategic level for theater nuclear warfare. So all in all, defensive is the official, you know, what the military planners tell themselves to sleep at night, but in reality, really is about conflict potential with NATO. So the signaling in itself is really important, right? Because this is about Russia's ability to move fast and to move well in one strategic dimension, which has to do with NATO's borders on the eastern flank. These large-scale operations really are about joint formations. They really are about high-level command and control. I think this was sufficiently covered by Anna, but this is really about the messaging behind that. Just to reiterate in terms of the context, what Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov of Russia said last April, that the United States is an adversary to Russia. So this sends a lot of signals concerning Russia's intentions behind it. But once again, I don't want to overplay the geopolitical significance of this exercise. A unique context as well when you look at the situation with Ukraine as a NATO and European ally, or yes, an ally definitely. This is also a unique situation concerning the pre-positioning of force that we saw in March and April 2021, with a lot of kit and gear and troops that moved to the central military district in Voronezh, and all the kits that stayed basically behind. And that's where I want to reinforce a point on Belarus, which is what I call the what stays behind logic, in the sense that we know Russia's been increasing its presence in the western military districts. They've also increased their presence in Kaliningrad, and Arsen alluded to it. It's you know what we should be looking at beyond what Russia does is what stays behind in Belarus after the exercise. This was already mentioned back in 2017 and fueled a lot of insecurity in the Western press concerning what would Russia be leaving behind. So I think we should also be looking at the weak signals at, you know, beyond the troops. If it's troops, then it's fine, you can deal with it. But if it's pre-positioning of force in terms of ammo, in terms of fuel storages, in terms of basing or kit for future bases, then there we have a problem. This is a weak signal we should be looking at very closely after the exercise, when Russian troops come back to their garrison and their staging grounds in Russia itself. So to come back to your initial question, Marcin, on the the NATO posture parts. I think we should be looking beyond, the officiality of this is about warfighting, this is about command and control and lessons learned, what it is that we have between the scenario and between what capabilities we will deploy. And I'd like to make 3 quick points on this. The first one is this sort of case in point that Zapad will rehearse what the Russian General Staff has been looking at for the past few years, which is what they call the strategy of limited action. This is sort of the new Gerasimov hybrid warfare doctrine, if you will, or Gerasimov doctrine, which is very much looking at the preemptive neutralization of threat, about increased readiness for the armed forces, and about fighting what they call the Trojan Horse, which is the usual rant about the 5th column protest potential that could destabilize a country, and I'm talking about the Union State here of Belarus and Russia, that could degenerate into further confrontation. And this is partly why, if you look at the scenario, you have the presence of these international terrorist organizations that happen to be siding with the fictional countries who also happen to be Poland, the Baltics, and the Nordic states. Of course, we all know that Poland, the Baltics, and the Nordic states are definitely siding with international terrorist organizations, because why wouldn't they? But this is also to show you the nature of the exercise, that this is really about, and in the context of the migrant crisis as well, and these poor migrants trapped at the border, that this could be used and justified and exploited as a sort of Trojan horse, that this sort of sub-threshold destabilization beyond, just NATO big warfare. This could be used in terms of basically sub-threshold hybrid components, and further to information warfare and great power propaganda that could be exploited during the exercise. I think it is also telling that the Rosgvardia and the FSB troops are technically part of the exercise and standing as a reserve force, officially to help Belarus in case there is a sort of color revolution happening, or in case they need to think about non-conventional solutions to non-conventional scenarios during the exercise. And this is further to this logic of strategy of limited action. You need to preemptively neutralize the threats through gray zone operations, through kinetic and non-kinetic warfare, creating operational surprise, and therefore more operational freedom and mission command at the tactical level, but also increasing your readiness in terms of command and control, support systems, military logistics, and also organization of the military industry. And further to this leads me to my second point. Zapad is really about logistics. It's about the ability of the armed forces to move well and to sustain strategic mobility across one strategic direction, which is already a lot because the Western military district is quite packed. But this is really about furthering this logic of preemptive neutralization of threats by going further into storage and pre-positioning of force. And this is this logic of opening key nodes or key points of resupply that you have in Kaliningrad, that you have now in Belarus, with all these discussions about the Grodno base, the training center, or these key nodes in Tajikistan and the Caucasus and so on. It really is about peacetime organization of force by pre-positioning a lot of kit and gear so you can move fast and well at the initial period of war. And this will be my third point. But further to this, if you look at the deployments in Crimea, if you look at the deployments in Voronezh in March, April, this is really about this logic of pre-storage of force, which is something that NATO should be looking quite actively in terms of what it is exactly that Russia is positioning at any given point. So this calls for, better integration of all points intelligent in terms of the weak signals, and in terms of not just looking at troops, but also looking at the at storage, basically. And this takes me to my third point, which is this logic of the initial period of war. We know Russia is fully aware that they cannot sustain peer competition with a technologically advanced, understand NATO, challenger for more than a few weeks, let's say, which places the onus on this tipping point of warfare where they need to move in force, create operational surprise, and basically create a fait accompli to come back to status quo ante. And I think this is telling that you've had a sort of a revamp of this initial period of war thinking that comes back from the 70s, 80s, and in terms of Soviet strategy back in the day, looking for this sort of tipping point of warfare and the ability of the armed forces to go into to operational surprise and more sub-threshold coercion to really seize the initiative. And this is where you will have a lot of unconventional thinking and unconventional testing at the tactical level during Zapad. A less scripted exercise, more operational freedom at the tactical level, and looking for more unconventional answers to an unconventional scenario to basically create the space for the deniability of Russia's presence in, potentially if they go into the into this these territories of these fictional states, which are once again NATO territory. So, conscious of time, and I'm getting close to my 10 minutes. As a way of conclusion, I think Zapad, as ever, is a symptom of a greater problem in this NATO-Russia relationship. I don't want to overplay or downplay the significance of the geopolitical messages, but once again, it is very much about the military value for the armed forces in and on themselves. I don't think NATO needs to be absolutely weary of changing its defense, deterrence, and dialogue posture when it comes to looking at this, because this is once again things that we know, right? They're just rehearsing lessons learned of command and control and things that we already know. But the nuance is important concerning this logic of strategy of limited action, of pre-positioning of force, and of the initial period of war. All these things need to be factored in more systematically in NATO and Western analysis about what Russia intends to do in potential warfighting situations. So more importantly, beyond that, the issue is about managing miscalculation and tactical errors. Russia and Belarus have been quite professional. I hate to say that, but you know what I mean, in terms of sending a notice to airmen, about sending the closure of certain parts of the airspace, for instance, about sending what they will deploy on what training polygon, with these invitations of international participation. So I'm not saying it's transparent. Of course it's not, right? It's as untransparent as it gets. But in terms of miscalculation management, I'm not expecting, as Arsen said, any surprise in terms of tactical errors or things going bang in the wrong place. But beyond the exercise, it's when it gets unscripted and when we get back to this normal relationship, this new normal of tension, of damage control between Russia and NATO, that miscalculations happen. And the further we get into this damage control, the further we get into tactical errors. So this is also something that we should be looking into in terms of engaging Russia at the lowest level possible in terms of military to military exchange. I'm not saying it should be dialogue, because it should not be dialogue just for the sake of it, but it should be smart engagement on where it matters, and what matters is really about miscalculation management, I think, at this stage. And also it calls for a different approach to deterrence, and so in terms of being more active in the gray zone, in terms of thinking about deterrence outside the box, and how we could leverage our strategic advantages against potential Russian vulnerabilities. Because Zapad is really about chest thumping. It really is about, looking through goggles at super manly stuff exploding on a training range. So it's all about showing Russia's strengths in warfighting. But I would argue we also need, in terms of deterrence, to look at Russian vulnerabilities, about Russian key strategic points that we could exploit in terms of turning around the deterrence side of it. But I'll be happy to discuss that further in the Q&A. Because all in all, what we get from Zapad is this over-focus on numbers. And I'm glad, that my colleagues didn't also over-focus on numbers, because whatever the number of troops, it doesn't really matter. It's what you do with it. It's how you use them in force. And I think this over-focus that we have a tendency to fall into, especially in the press during Zapad or other Russian exercises, is part of Russia's reflexive control. It's part of great power propaganda, that they're really focusing our attention in a box, exactly where they want us to, and not to look at what's around it. So once again, I would really look at the military value for Russia and for Russia in and on itself, instead of just the numbers and the geopolitical significance. Otherwise, it leads to self-deterrence. Of course, it's super scary to think about 200,000 troops deployed at NATO's border. But should this lead to self-deterrence, or should this lead to censoring our own options when it comes to responding to it? I don't think so, because this is, once again, how they play against us in terms of reflexive control. So I will stop there, and I really look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Mathieu. Thank you for what I think was a very sobering analysis of the importance of and the significance of the exercise. I really liked your analysis from the very military point of view at the tactical level. So it's really welcomed voice, the particularly when you look at the, as you mentioned, fascination with numbers, which is abundant on social media this time. So it's and this is precisely what we're trying to do in PISM with events like this. So dig deeper, not just scratch the surface. So use and invite the best to talk about defense and foreign policy issues, because all the three presentations were much deeper, and I hope that our online audience enjoyed it. Actually, the chat box on YouTube is full with questions, so I will not attempt to add any more, but I would like to link them with what has been just said. You, Mathieu, you mentioned, you alluded to the perspective, also to the issue of transparency and improving the transparency in the NATO-Russia relations. And as a matter of fact, we've got a set of questions from a person who you don't really need to actually introduce if you are a defense expert, if you are within the, let's say, defense bubble in Europe and outside of the other side of the pond. So William Arberg joined us watched us on YouTube, and he posed a number of questions, which I will not read for the sake of time. Sorry, William, but actually just to signal them. Well, the naval phase of the exercise, William asks about its role, about its function, as I understand, also as an element of the Russian sea-based anti-air, anti-ship, and amphibious capability. So, if any of you would like to reflect upon the naval phase. William also of the exercise. William also asked about the nuclear component, which was mentioned. So, is it there? Is it openly presented, or we will have to wait until the end to see if there were any nuclear element, or it is already there? And also the issue of transparency, which you mentioned, how much Russia, okay, I'll be provocative. Did Russia was Russia creative again with regards to Vienna document obligations and still and again pretended that we are below the limits, or there is maybe more transparency this time? And if not the Vienna document, then the bilateral. William asked about the potential of bilateral confidence and security building measures between Russia and Belarus. We have such, there are some, and between Lithuania, I believe, also, and Belarus, which have been used, which have functioned only a few years ago. So would you like to comment on the potential to use these CSBMs to limit the risks of, for instance, this kind of incidents which were mentioned by Arsen? And also, and finally, a question from William on on how much I understand the focus of the exercise on the terrorist activity, as it is called in the scenario, actually signals that there is a fear that the West would again kind of stage a color revolution somewhere in Belarus. So a question more of the geopolitical nature. So this is already a big menu, but I would also add to this the issue of this hybridity. I mean, we all don't like this word, but it is there. You mentioned, Mathieu, that there is a very strong element on unconventional reaction to unconventional threats, and we have seen also in the expert bubble a talk about the border crisis with the migrants being part of the Zapad. So if any of you could actually allude to address this issue, develop it a bit more. So a full plate of questions and issues. How about we start with Anna with, let's say, 5 minutes, so that we can have surely another or maybe even 2 rounds on Q&As. Anna, the floor is yours. Please pick up whatever you would like to focus on.
Thank you, Marcin, very much. Thank everybody for very interesting questions, and I'll try to focus on some of them. Maybe I will start with this security building measures, because we have 2 countries engaged in Zapad. I mean Russia and Belarus. With Belarus, Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania has its own bilateral agreements, which are even more stronger than the Vienna document. Of course, they are based on Vienna document, but they even reduces the limits in which the obligatory notifications, observations are not allowed, but even are obliged. I mean, both sides are obliged. And more or less, Belarus is trying to behave itself in accordance with those kind of documents. Of course, observators from NATO countries, and especially those one was invited to Belarus. And even I will put it like that if you observe information from Belarusian MOD website about yesterday's presentation about those drills, there are plenty of pictures of military attaché from NATO countries, including, for instance, Poland and the Baltics. So, of course, we are trying to use this kind of agreements. However, as I mentioned before, definitely both countries, I mean, Belarus and Russia, are just trying to avoid those obligatory observations and notifications by keeping the troops, I mean, the level of troops and level of equipment under the limits of Vienna document. It's one issue. Second issue is that Russia is rather trying to avoid those obligations from Vienna document, and sometimes they do it from their perspective very smartly. Sometimes not, but still, when we look at those numbers, this 200,000, definitely not in this active phases, because we are look just on it. And of course not, I mean, the whole Western Military District is covered by the Vienna document, but definitely there are not so, how to say, transparent, but definitely the level of transparency, when we compare it to 2070, it's lesser than then. When it comes to the question about the naval phases of those exercises, we have to take into account that, as it was said by Mathieu and Arsen, Russia is also practicing some activities in the sake of itself. So definitely the Baltic states, the Baltic fleet, is engaged on it. We also have taken into account that during last years, the Baltic fleet was rearmed, so they have much more new ships that they have to, how to say, practice. I mean, and moreover, when we are thinking about the role of Kaliningrad, all of those A2AD systems, all of those issues, because we just focus on the first part of the scenario, that it's a military aggression from Western countries to the Central Federation, but the scenario also includes counter reaction of this Central Federation and Polish Republic, which means counter offensive. And when we are just thinking about not about just only those three Western countries, but NATO as a whole, it's the Baltic Sea. It's crucial for the sake of security. I mean, for the security of the Baltic states. They are the routes on which other NATO countries will, for instance, shift their troops and equipment. And that is why this phases naval one is also so important, because probably they will try to, how to say, to present their power on this crucial for the Baltic and the Nordic states as well, sea. So and of course it's also important from Russia point of view also to somehow support all of those A2AD systems in the Kaliningrad. So I will stop here just because of this, for the sake of time.
Thank you, Anna. Arsen, would you like to jump in with your comments on these questions, on these issues?
I will be very brief. So when it comes to the naval and missile nuclear components of the exercise, of course they will happen, because Russia is conducting their own strategic stuff and command maneuvers, and actually they start from the mid of July and usually ends, as Mathieu mentioned, with strategic missile forces exercise in October, November, sometimes in December. So we will definitely see these components a little bit later. But when it comes to the joint exercise between Belarus and Russia, I don't expect something will happen like this. And it is also a great way how Russia is avoiding additional attention and inspections defined by the Vienna document, because actually Russia spreads some smaller training exercises and maneuvers in space and in time, so they can allegedly claim that they are not subordinated to one grand design, so they can declare that they don't need invite international observers. When it comes to joint exercise in Belarus, as I have mentioned, some international observers from such organizations like UN, OEC, and the Red Cross are invited. Also, the military attaches, including from Latvia, Poland, and Lithuania, will attend the exercise. But comparing to the previous Zapad, this year we haven't invited national observers from Polish and Lithuanian MODs like we did last year, and I believe it's due to the general political climate in relations between our countries. And once again, I would like to emphasize that the only military capabilities that will stay after the Zapad exercise will be presented by 4 Su-30SM fighter jets and some command and control subunits of the S-400 system, and that's all. So I don't expect that Russia will try to preposition its forces under the coverage of this exercise, because at this moment there is no need for doing so. And actually I don't expect any strategic surprises from the Russian side, since the Kremlin has already exhausted the limits of its geopolitical adventurism. If they cross some red lines, for instance, invading Ukraine once again or invading Belarus, they will definitely commit a suicide, because it will inevitably activate a draconian sanctions options against Russia, and I think the Kremlin is avoiding this scenario today.
Thank you. Thank you, Arsen. You've just addressed one of the questions which haven't been yet read out by me, but they were posted in the YouTube chat. So thank you for that. For the, I mean the perspective of some Russian force elements staying in Belarus. Now, Mathieu, the naval element, nuclear element, if you would like to develop on this, but also maybe if you could expand a little bit what you said about these non-conventional answers to non-conventional threats, and you know, something what is again used to be referred to as hybridity or gray zone activities, please.
Right. Absolutely, and great questions from William. So, from what we know of the scenario, they promised what they call a complex aerial situation. So it's going basically to be a rejoinder between high levels command and control and military logistics and joint forces between ground, joint operations between ground and air, basically. With an emphasis on fires, on exploiting the recon strike and recon fire contours, a lot of emphasis on air defense, integrating UAVs, integrating electromagnetic warfare into the mix, basically to stress test this ability of the Russian armed forces to leverage modern warfare as they understand it. So the Russian army can only be as good as what they already have, and what they have is a ground-based army with aviation assets and aviation enablers, further with UAVs and electromagnetic warfare capabilities. So this is basically what will be tested during the scenario. In terms of the naval aspects, of course, in terms of joint operations, there will be a big naval component, as Anna mentioned. So the Baltic Fleet will be mobilized, the Northern Fleet will be mobilized as well. So it really is about how other military districts and other force components can reinforce the main military district, here the Western, in terms of warfighting capabilities at the initial period of war and beyond, and how they can force generate quickly to supplement an existing military district. So we'll know more about the scenario as it unfolds, which is also interesting because contrary to Zapad 17, where we had hours and hours of pre-game presentation by Belarus and Russia on the exact nature of the scenario, things here were left a little bit more hushed, more hidden. And I think this is part of this unconventional thinking. The scenario will basically evolve as it goes in terms of mission command. And this has a lot to do with unconventional thinking and planning. And to come back to William's other question, and what should we expect in terms of these terrorist activities and these fifth column things? Well, I don't know exactly, but if you judge by the presence, the emphasis they have on special forces and special operations, on VDV for quick in airlift and vertical mobility, for quick response, the presence of reservists as well, which is always a big part of Zapad, but also Rosgvardia and the FSB, then you can imagine that this part of this scenario, specifically during the counteroffensive phase, which is the last 4 days, when the Union state of Russia and Belarus basically pushes back and wins, creates victories across all the polygons. I think this will have a component where you have this intermingling of these fifth column, maybe proxy, private military companies, Western titushkis and other little blue men instead of little green men that have direct operational, link with the states of this Western, this northern union of states, which represent basically NATO territory. So I think this is what we can expect, but I don't know how much of it will be publicized. If they really want to go into more mission command, to more tactical freedom to create potential errors and mistakes from happening, and to create more space for the deniability of these mistakes, and I don't think they will advertise it that much, because you don't want to see the Russian army losing stuff right on the ground. It's all about great victory. It's all about, when you look at the Russian feeds on Zapad, they kill, we destroyed the notional enemy. We won victories here and there. So it's all about, the victory and Putin looking good, looking at these victories when stuff blows on training ranges. So if they go into more, unconventional thinking, then I don't think we're going to see that much in terms of the official press releases. It'll be probably more hush-hushed, and probably more taking place during the second phase, which will take place more in Russia than in Belarus. Belarus will be for the media, the first 3 days, basically, and then the counteroffensive will be probably a bit more hidden and not reported in the Russian press, I think. And one last thing on number and transparency. Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because all the observers are friends of Russia and countries that deploy during Zapad, like Sri Lanka, India, and Kazakhstan and so on. So, you're between friends, numbers don't really matter. So, transparency is the only way you make of it. And Russia has no intention to be respecting these numbers and these Vienna documents in the first place, because they're not interested in confidence building measures in the first place. So why would they bother with that?
Thank you, Mathieu. That was a first round of questions. We have room for the second one, although some of the questions have been already answered, like this question of Mr. Cezar-Lusiński about the scale of the exercises, and an anonymous question about the internal ramifications for Belarus. I guess we'll address this. But there are the questions from a question addressed by Artur Kacprzyk, PISM analyst, following defense and deterrence on, let's say, I'll put it, lessons learned from Zapad in terms of what are the NATO targets for Russia? What does the scenario say about Russian ability and the Russian priorities with regards to let's say, blunting any potential NATO reaction to a Russian scenario now of a crisis. Now we're speaking, of course, about any potential hypothetical crisis in the eastern flank. And there was also a follow-up question from William on potential new elements in the doctrine, which we may see or may not see from Zapad. And I would wrap it into a question to actually all of you in terms of the military analysis, again, tactical level analysis. Is the scenario showing us that we have, let's say, a new quality when it comes to Russian ability to play some scenarios in the eastern flank, some hypothetical scenarios of crisis in the eastern flank, a crisis with NATO, to its own benefit? And I mean, how we see the widening pool of scenarios in which Russia may actually assure a quick win in a time and space limited conflict with NATO. Is Zapad bringing us in, or is it just a rehearsal of what we assumed would happen when we were constructing the EFP back in 2015, 2016, and then reforming NATO command structure, NATO force structure? Of course, I'm alluding to now with this to a question on the ramifications for NATO, but I guess this would be good to somehow try to move towards the end of our discussion. We have still like 15 minutes left, but if there are any more questions, please do put them in the chat box in YouTube. I'm talking now to our online audiences now, of course, or to Twitter or to Facebook. There will be maybe 2 or 3 minutes to read out a very final question, but let's now come back again in this order. Anna, Arseny, and you, Mathieu, with this general, let's say, question about what's new, and is there a new? Does Zapad demonstrate a new quality, let's say, of Russian military? Anna, please.
Thank you, Marcin. I will probably not focus on just military component of that, but this is something which we love or hate. I mean, hybrid one, because from my personal perspective, I think that the one issue which is very important and which is maybe not total different, but it's different from previous exercises of previous Zapad exercises. It's the component of this kind of information warfare, hybrid attacks, creation of some artificial conflicts on the border between the Union State and NATO countries, like it was with the migrants, because we can observe that Russia is having plenty of, I would say, put it like that, plenty of goals which are compared to each other, and one of them is just to create an, how to say, maybe not artificial, but a huge discussion within the countries, like it was created, for instance, in Poland or in the Baltics, in terms of situation with migrants, which is a very controversial one. Something which, for instance, Russia also did during the presidential campaign. I mean, not this one, the last one in the US, but the previous one. they are starting to create a huge discussion within the society to raise the level of polarization, which is also very dangerous from the perspective of, how to say, NATO countries, I will put it like that. Because I'm also pretty sure that not only Poland and the Baltics will be the aim of or the target of such kind of activities. And the second issue is combined with that, to some extent, is also the undermine the role of uniformed, how to say, people, military one, not, I mean, to decrease level of trust within the societies of NATO countries to their own armed forces, which also will influence seriously the political will, for instance, of the authorities when it comes to some kind of confrontation of using such kind of forces. So I think we have to also pay attention not only to the equipment that Russia will use, not only to, of course, it's important, but more or less we know what they have and what in what kind of how they could use this kind of equipment. But we also have to focus on this hybrid warfare, which will be maybe not also the preemptive phases of such kind of aggression, but a regular one, which will help Russia to achieve its own goals. Maybe not, maybe even to win without using, just with using the threat, not a regular military forces.
Thank you. Arsen, I forgot to add one more issue to the overall question, because as Anna mentioned, the question is whether Zapad shows that there is something new quality, but also with regards to Belarus, this is now a good question. I mean, this exercise showed that, let's say, we have crossed a line when it comes, or a line has been crossed by Belarus and Russia, and that inevitably the integration will be deepened, so that the entire, let's say, force balance in the eastern flank will have to be looked at in a different way than previously. So if you could also address this, thank you.
Thank you, Marcin. Maybe I will start with your last question. So I don't think that the red line has been crossed. As you have mentioned already, this is a new round of traditional bargaining between Alexander Lukashenko and the Russian leadership for getting more financial and political support from the Russian side, but demonstrating some sort of geopolitical loyalty in exchange. And if you look at the agreements that were concluded yesterday between Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko, actually they don't help Alexander Lukashenko to fix the problem of getting more political and especially financial support from the Kremlin, meaning that we will see more and more talks and negotiations, while Russia will be reluctant more and more to provide the Belarusian leadership with the needed financial support, which could easily create a new ground for conflict between Minsk and Moscow, when Alexander Lukashenko acknowledges that he can't get what he wants from Moscow. In terms of political military integration, as I have said, this 31st roadmap envisaging deepening integration of the armed forces, establishing joint president, parliament, security apparatus, it has been already excluded from the agenda at the end of 2019. And Lukashenko is not going to give up his veto power within the current security architecture, because it is one of his foundations, one of his corner stones of his personal power. He will never give up this monopoly on power and the use of force. That is why, if concessions are possible, they will be rather tactical, and Lukashenko's intentions will be still maintaining the whole control over all military assets deployed by Russians in Belarus. And you can see it in case of this joint air forces and air defense combat training center, which will be subordinated to the Belarusian command. When it comes to what we could expect from the military training, at least what I know, the Belarusian and Russian sides are going to practice such elements like landing tactical landings, storming the small cities and villages, combating the illegal armed formations and sabotage groups, restoration of control over the state border, and it is planned that the Belarusian and Russian units will be acting as a tactical battalion groups, supported by the aviation and also artillery units, especially MLRS and missile complexes. So I would say we saw pretty much of such elements in case of Russian military actions in Donbass, but without this aviation component. When it comes to the Russian strategic command and staff maneuvers, I would say that probably they will be focused on combating the multi-domain operations, and I suggest to follow how they will be using their reserves, especially in the context that they have recently introduced the idea of combat-ready reserves. Also, they're developing concepts of the territorial defense forces, and probably it will also be practiced somehow during the exercise, especially when it comes to formation of some inter-service or inter-branch group of forces together with Rosgvardia or FSB border guards, and so on and so forth. And what it seems to me that also they will be practicing a lot of tactical landing elements, at least if you're following the Russian military magazines. They are discussing new types of its applications in the contemporary military conflicts, one of which they define this multi-domain battle or multi-domain operations. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Arseny. And last but not least, as I said, Mathieu, the plate is again full, so please pick up any issue, the doctrine or the targets and or the overall implications for NATO.
Right. So I'll be quick in the interest of time as well. So a few points on the sort of, the priority NATO targets. So this is where it goes into this defensive logic of what Zapad really is, because this is not an exercise where Russia is the onus, because they feel they are attacked by an enemy and they need to respond in terms of counteroffensive. So this is a stress test and a response from the Russian armed forces in terms of war fighting. This is quite the opposite of how they would envisage regional warfare against a technologically advanced competitor, understand NATO, where they would actually do the opposite, right? They would own the initial period of war, go in to do operational surprise, quick in, quick stop, creating a fait accompli. And this relates to the ability of the Russian armed forces to leverage their advantages in terms of blunting an enemy's command and control, and their ability of the enemy to move and operate in contested environments. And this is why Russia is looking at air defense, not air superiority, right? It's all about the tactical enablers. So it's more about the response than about owning this initial period of war in this scenario, because this feeds into the defensive logic. New military doctrine, yeah, absolutely. It's a long time coming. It will be coming between now and 2022. This will represent Gerasimov's legacy, not his doctrine, but his legacy definitely, and sort of enshrining this logic of limited action, of active defense, Trojan horses, and so on, and all the lessons learned from Syria, from Ukraine, and beyond. So Zapad really is a sort of stress test as well for what will be coming in terms of the next military doctrine. And concerning the last question on the quality of the scenario over quantity. So I think Zapad is also a sort of continuity when it comes to the widening pool of scenarios Russia is rehearsing. There might be the presence of the further integration of private military companies. We know there will be a lot of asymmetric enablers tested, autonomous systems, robotics, electronic warfare, cyber, and so on. So all in all these things, create more space for deniability in terms of sub-threshold gray zone operations, and also lower the cost of intervention and risk-taking for Russia. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Mathieu. Thank you for being brief, because indeed we have just been we've just run out of time, but we cannot go offline without saying a big thank you to all of you for taking your time and talking today in this online open discussion about Zapad 2021 exercise. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure I feel that we really talked through all the details of this exercise. And what I find particularly important is that we do understand precisely what the threat to the eastern flank, what the threat posed by Russia actually is, how it looks like at the military level, what are the vulnerabilities which we can also exploit to bolster our defense and deterrence, and where Russia precisely wants us to look at, so that we don't really see its own vulnerabilities and the areas where things are not that rosy. This is absolutely important for the future of defense and deterrence policy of NATO, for the future of peace in Europe. So I'm really happy that we touched upon these elements. Once again, Anna Maria Dyner, Arsen Sivitsky, and Mathieu Boulègue have been with us, and we are really looking forward to producing further online discussions. So dear online viewers, please do stay tuned and check regularly PISM website, PISM profiles on social media, because we will be having more of that events also in hybrid format. So look also for options of in-person participation into different PISM events. But today, for now, thank you very much, and see you, all of you, hopefully soon, if COVID allows, in person. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.